Welcome to EDD 918, Module 6, and this is Lecture 4. Sorry, I lost track of my numbers there. Lecture 4 for Module 6. And in this lecture, we're going to be looking at positive psychological capital, or positive PSYCAP, or just PSYCAP. I'll probably just refer to it as PSYCAP throughout. Which obviously is the abbreviation for psychological capital. And this is an area that, if you dig into organizational behavior literature, you're starting to see it more and more. And it really was originated, and I guess maybe why I like it, and it's a little bit why I talk about it, I guess, is that it actually originated here at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. From the work of Fred Luthans, who I mentioned in the previous lecture, and he and some of his students, his doctoral students, as well as some colleagues. For those of you who are familiar with leadership literature, maybe you've been through the leadership course already, the name Bruce Avolio, Avolio, is probably at least a little bit familiar to you. Dr. Avolio has done a lot of research in the transformational leadership area, full range leadership, transformational leadership. And so Avolio was here at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, for a while in the School of Business. And while he was here, Luthans and he worked together on several things, and one of them was this area of positive psychological capital. And it builds off of the positive organizational behavior movement. And they were able to do some pretty good research with it. Research is still being done in this area. And there's a lot of positive things, good things, effective things, and good research that's coming with it. So I think there's some merit to it. And the first time, when I was in the doc seminar course with Luthans and he presented these ideas to us, it really resonated with me. And I don't know, I'm hoping maybe something in some of our doctoral courses, there's been some concept for you, hopefully more than one, but at least one that just really clicked and it resonated. And not just from an academic standpoint, but I mean, like, for your life, like practically, not that academics aren't practical, but you know what I mean. But my hope is that there's something that comes out of these courses, whatever it may be, that you go, yeah, that's like, whew, what a neat concept. And this was one of those for me. It just helped me kind of put things into perspective. There have been some others. Some have come through courses. Others came through my time in corporate learning and development. Like, if you've heard me in other classes talk about the ladder of inference. Well, I guess I did in this course in 918. The ladder of inference, that was a really key concept in my life. And I think I said that in that lecture. So anyway, psychological capital is kind of like that. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about it here. So the first question really is, what is psychological capital? And that may be exactly what you're asking. Well, I gave you 3 examples here, and Luthans and his colleagues talk about these. A lot of times we think about these kinds, boy, that's pretty bad. This kind of capital, the ones listed here. Economic capital, right? If we talk about a company or an organization, a business, or even an individual, and we refer to their economic capital, what we're talking about there are their physical and financial assets, their buildings, their facilities, but also how much money do they have in their bank, and do they have an endowment, and those kind of things, right? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about economic capital. But then, especially for individuals, we often talk about social capital. Who do you know? What networks do you have? We talked about, and I apologize, the modules are starting to run together in my mind, but I believe it was just last module when we talked about power and influence and power structures in organizations. That's social capital, right? Who do you know? Who's in your networks? And we use that. We use our social capital. We use that in our everyday human relationships, right? We build up goodwill with one another. Yes, because we care about individuals. And also then it helps if we've built up goodwill. We have social capital if we need something. I recall when I was growing up, I'm the younger brother, just have one brother. So I'm the younger one. And the advantage of younger siblings is we get to learn from the mistakes of our older siblings. My older brother was always late for curfew. Not by a lot, but 10, 15 minutes. And my mom's a worrier, so she would be worried and frustrated and everything else. And so, and it caused consequences for him. Well, I took a page out of that and I'm like, be early. So when I got old enough to be out and driving, I made it a point to be 5 to 10 minutes early all of the time for curfew. And then when times rolled around when I needed to call, and this was pre-cell phone, so I had to use a friend's phone or find a pay phone, by the way. But when I would call and say, hey, can I be a little bit late, like 20 minutes late? Sure, no problem. Why? Because I built up social capital. And we do that in our organizations all the time. And then the last one there is human capital. And this is very individual, right? This is your own skills, abilities, knowledge, things like that. So that's often what we think of when we talk about the capital that organizations and or people, units, groups, remember our 3 levels of analysis for org behavior, individual, group, and organization. This is a lot of times what we think of. Well, Luthans and his colleagues said, we think there's another, as they studied this more, they said, we think there is another kind of capital, and that's psychological capital. Now, just a quick note, why is it called positive psychological capital? Well, if you've looked at the slides, you're going to see that the states that they talk about, the components, are all positive things, and so they fall into that positive organizational behavior, positive psychology movement, so therefore it's positive psychological capital. And I've given you Luthan's definition there that he and his colleagues came up with. It's a lot. I normally don't like putting that much information on a slide, a PowerPoint slide, but I figured since you were having it yourself rather than me projecting it on a screen, it's a little easier to read. But you see it there. It's an individual's positive psychological state of development. We're going to come back to that idea near the end of the lecture. That state of development, that is a key phrase for psychological capital. So don't lose sight of that, right? Positive psychological state of development that is characterized by having confidence or self-efficacy to take on and put in the necessary effort to succeed at challenging tasks. 2, making a positive attribution, optimism, about succeeding now and in the future. 3, persevering toward goals and, when necessary, redirecting paths to goals, hope, in order to succeed. And 4, when beset by problems and adversity, sustaining and bouncing back, and even beyond, resiliency to attain success. And so wrapped up in that definition are the 4 components of positive psychological capital: self-efficacy, optimism, hope, and resiliency. Now, we're going to walk through each of those, but I'm going to walk through them in a different order because the way the acronym that they have developed for positive psychological capital is HERO. And so it just takes those same concepts but spells it out in a word so you can remember it. So we're going to walk through it in that order because there is no order to these. Now, Luthans will tell you, as he told us, efficacy, self-efficacy, they just call it efficacy, is without a doubt the strongest of the 4 components. It has been the most researched. It is the most developed from both a theoretical and research and applied standpoint, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. it goes in order. It goes efficacy as far as research and development, efficacy, then optimism, then hope and resiliency are kind of the same. So that's why it's listed in the order it is in the definition, but they spell out hero with it. So that's the order we'll use, just so that you can keep it in mind. So the first one is hope. And the key thing to remember about hope here is this is not, as I said there, it's not just a sunny, optimistic attitude. This isn't the hope of, oh, we have a picnic planned today, I hope it doesn't rain, right? That's not the kind of hope that we're talking about here. There are two components to the hope that is wrapped up in positive PSYCAP, and it's willpower and way power. Willpower and way power, and in parentheses you see I put agency for willpower and pathways for way power. In literature, academic literature, especially within organizational scholarship, anytime we talk about an agent and agency, like if we're talking about influence and we talk about the agent, that's the person doing the influencing and the influencer. And when we talk about agency, it is referring to this very thing, the willpower and potentially the physical power, the ability to do something. So do you have the agency to do what you need to do? And it could be talking about other aspects of that as well, meaning it might literally be a physical kind of strength. Do you have that? Do you have the resources you need? So it isn't just limited to willpower, but within hope, we're using that concept of agency in connection with willpower. And so what we're talking about, it's not just that sunny, optimistic attitude of, I hope it doesn't do this, or I hope it does do, I hope, maybe I'll use losing weight. That's always a popular one to use. Plus maybe coming off of quarantine as I'm recording this, as things are starting to open up, there's probably going to be maybe a greater need for some to lose some weight again, because we were all staying inside and baking a lot. At least we were in our house. But so, I hope I lose weight. Okay, there's an example where I have the agency, potentially, to lose weight. Right? Sitting back and just saying, I don't like the weight I've gained. I don't like what I look like. I hope I lose weight. We all know that's not going to help me lose weight. I have to have the willpower to do it. I have to have the willpower to say no to the dessert, to say no to the extra helping. I have to have the willpower to get up off the couch and walk around the block or start jogging or exercise, right? So there's the willpower part of it that comes into play with hope. And then you have way power, the pathways. How do you get there? And so way power then is where you're going to be setting goals, but also moving around obstacles. And that's the next two statements that are in quotes there. These show up as part of hope assessments and things like that. One of them is, and they ask people, how do you agree with this statement or whatever? I energetically pursue my goals. So goals are kind of the pathways, but I energetically pursue them. That's speaking to willpower, right? I'm going to go after my goals. I don't just say, I want to lose 10 pounds. I actually energetically pursue it. Here's my plan. I can show you how I'm going to achieve this goal. That's that willpower part. And then pathways is this idea, and that's where if you look up at the definition of hope, or the definition of PSYCAP, the hope part, persevering toward goals and when necessary, redirecting paths to goals in order to succeed. There are lots of ways around any problem. That's characteristic statement of a, in this term, hopeful person. There is a problem in front of me. There's a barrier, there's a blockade, and I go, there's a way around it. I think using the weight and exercise example, I think we saw examples of this with the recent quarantine going on with COVID-19 for people who do regularly go to workout facilities, gyms, and things like that. They were shut down. They couldn't go. And so some people may have given up and just said, oh, well, I can't exercise. But I saw lots of videos out there of people saying, hey, here's how to set up a home gym. Here are the things around your house that you can use to get resistance training or weight training or whatever. So that's what we're talking about. A hopeful person says, I energetically pursue my goals. Oh, there's a barrier. There's something, a problem, a challenge. Well, you know what? There are lots of ways around any problem. How do I get around it? A person who is not, and they don't have a term for the opposite of this, someone, though, who doesn't have hope in this context, either one is not energetically pursuing their goals, and or when that challenge, that barrier comes up, they kind of give up. I don't know what to do. And so what they've seen with hope is that they've seen in research a positive impact on athletics. That probably makes sense. Emotional health, and here's a key one, academics. I think that's something we can all pay attention to. And then they're starting to see it in work environments as well. So that's hope. So that's the H in hero in PsyCap. Efficacy. I'm not going to spend as much time on efficacy simply because my hope my guess is that probably all of you have been at least introduced to the concept of self-efficacy. As you see there, it's based on the social cognitive theory of Albert Bandura. And I'm if you've come this far into a doctoral program, especially given the number of students we have who are connected with education, I can only assume, and I know, never make assumptions, right? But I can only assume you've been at least introduced to Bandura and self-efficacy. If not, there's a lot of information out there that you can read up on him. But in taking efficacy and applying it to psychological capital, organizational behavior areas, Stajkovic, I think, is how you say his name. I remember Luthon's telling us how to pronounce his name, but now I can't remember. It's been a few years. But how they see efficacy in relation to this is it refers to an individual's conviction about his or her abilities to mobilize the motivation, cognitive resources, and courses of action needed to successfully execute a specific task within a given context. And the key part of efficacy is kind of that last part. I mean, all of it's important. I don't want to take away from that, but I think probably most of us are familiar with the idea of self-efficacy is feeling like you can do something, right? But where it is different than self-esteem is successfully execute a specific task within a given context. And then I put that last bullet point, task specific. And this is the key part of efficacy. General self-esteem, sorry about that, I forgot to silence my phone. General self-esteem, arrogance almost, you could say. I mean, self-esteem can be good, arrogance tends to be bad. But general self-esteem or arrogance might look at anything and say, I can do that. I can do these things. This is almost, if I could, a little bit of an immature view. The little kid looks back and says, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that, right? Efficacy does not do that. Efficacy is task specific. And so this is where Bandura has used it a lot within adult learning. And especially we use it a lot within the training and development world, corporate training and development for adult learning. Because the idea is this: I'm training you to do a specific task. And you may walk into that training room, if you will, and you have no efficacy. You think, I can't do this thing. We walk you through the training and we show you how to do it. And then you walk out of the training room with a high level of efficacy saying, I can now do this task, right? And I think of it, just to be a little bit ridiculous. You ask me to develop a course, an academic course on leadership, organizational behavior, English literature, theater. Those are all areas where I could develop a course, even in history, social studies. I have efficacy, if that's the way, if I can say it that way. I can do that. But if you come and ask me, hey, Mears, we want you to teach a course this fall on anatomy and physiology, I can't do it. And, and that's not to say I don't have self-confidence. I have self-confidence in the areas which I know and I'm good at. I know nothing about anatomy and physiology, right? That's not where I've been trained. And so that's the idea of efficacy. So we build efficacy within specific tasks and given context. That's a key part. And another real quick, and I need to move on. This lecture is probably going to be a little bit longer than some of the others. But another key part, like when we're training with efficacy and where it comes into the training and development world, is this. You always want to use what we call a relevant other. A relevant other. That doesn't mean you don't use subject matter experts. But if I bring in, if I've got a bunch of rookie salespeople and I bring in like the nation's top salesperson for our organization, there's going to be a big disconnect. Now, I might bring that person in to kind of rah people up and, hey, look what you can accomplish someday. But if I use them as my standard and say, okay, rookie, here's where you need to get, what actually shows during research is we're going to cause discouragement and people will wash out because they're like, there's no way. So we might use them overall as kind of a lofty goal, but then to do the actual training and really help them, we're going to bring someone in who is much closer to their ability level, or at least can relate down. That's that relevant other. I'll give you a quick example. When I was going through some training at State Farm Insurance as a brand new auto claim representative, I'd never done this before. And they had a really good training program. We're in it, and they had us sit with a wide variety of people. Some of them had been doing this for years, and we could learn something. But they had us spend a lot of time with people who had only been out of training for about a year or so. And they were good at their job, so they were kind of top of their class, but still, they hadn't been out of training very long. That was on purpose. They were using Bandura's theory in their training program, and it was a good idea because we could relate to them. So that's what we're talking about with efficacy. Moving on quickly here, resiliency. This is the ability to bounce back from both bad and good events. And it's the ability to improvise. And this is a particularly valuable trait in environments such as we're in right now, in times of uncertainty and change. And I realize, people have been saying for a while, change is the new constant and all that. But given where we are with COVID-19, we really are in times of uncertainty and change. And so resiliency is the kind of thing that is key, that is very vital for us. And I want to bounce back. Sorry, I was looking at the words. Hop back up to that first bullet point, the ability to bounce back from both bad and good events. And that's a key idea, because a lot of times we think of being resilient as bouncing back from bad events. But a key part of it is also bouncing back from the good events, meaning we have success and I can quickly regroup and say, hey, that was great, celebrate the success, but now I'm going to move on. And I think we've all met those people who they have a success and they can't get over their own success. And then what happens is, because they may have 2 or 3 successes, and that's great, but then they hit a failure and then they don't know what to do. And you say, well, then they're not bouncing back from a bad event. Well, yes, but I would argue it's because they never bounce back from the good event. And, an interesting study was done with this, and I can't remember the author's name. But what they did is, and I think it was done through Stanford, but I might be wrong about that. So don't quote me on that part. But the professor in charge of it, what she did is they took a group of elementary school students, middle school students, somewhere in that age bracket, and they took a group and basically kind of told one group, hey, you guys are smart. You are naturally smart. And see these grades that you've gotten? It's because you're just naturally smart. You just get it. And then they took another group, and I mean, obviously there's a little bit more to it. They took another group of them, and they told them, they said, see these good grades that you have? It's because you work really hard. You know how to study. You know how to dig in. And if anything you might lack in natural ability, boy, you work really hard, and you know how to achieve, right? And so then they took both groups, put them through a series of tests, and both groups they had do poorly. I mean, obviously this is designed. So both groups did poorly. And then they came back and started, working with them some more and kind of retested. And what they found was the group that they had told worked hard, they had told them their good grades that they had before, the reason you have those is because you work hard, you know how to study, and you dig in. They bounced back from that failure. The group that they had told, you're just naturally smart, you just naturally get it, a greater percentage of them could not bounce back. Because see, what happened was the resilient group said, this stinks, I failed, but you know what? I know how to work hard, I know how to study, and so I'm going to dig in and overcome this. The group that had been told, you're just this naturally smart, gifted kid, they're met with failure, and it's like, well, what do I guess maybe I'm not naturally smart, right? So they start doubting themselves. Obviously, they cleaned it all up later. But that's the idea of resilience or resiliency. And I saw this even in leadership development. Certain people were tagged as high potential, and they were just told, hey, you're just awesome. You're a great natural leader. You're gonna go places. And then they hit their first failure, and failures are gonna come. They hit their first failure, and it was like, I had to have some deep conversations with these people because like their whole world is now shaken. Like, I don't know what to do. I think my career's over. Like, it's one failure. You get over it. Suck it up and move on. But they'd been told how great they were, whereas others who had worked hard to earn their spots were able to bounce back. So that's the idea of resiliency. And then finally, optimism. And I need to move here quickly. Optimism, this isn't just the power of positive thinking, kind of the Norman Vincent Peale idea. Rather, optimism is how we look at our successes and our failures. And those who have optimism rather than a negative viewpoint, but more of the optimistic outlook, they tend to have, that should be not and, they tend to have an unstable and specific attribution focus. Now, you may be thinking unstable, that sounds like a negative. Actually, in this case, it's a good thing. Unstable means if I have a failure, I look at that. An unstable focus means I say, this is a one-off, or this is in this situation, and that's where it means specific attribution focus. Someone who has a stable attribution focus is, again, if I can use the Eeyore example, I have a failure. Well, that figures. I'm a loser, right? That's that negative viewpoint. In optimism, a person with optimism hits a failure and they go, okay, what happened here? This isn't normal for me. Not that again, it's not that they have this arrogance like, I'm this total rock star, but it's just, I'm a pretty competent person and I think I do well. So, okay, what happened here? And it was in this situation. And then they also have a good balance of internal and external attribution focus or foci. And what we mean by that is they're willing to look inside and find fault with themselves in certain situations. And you may not like the way I put that, but you know what I mean. Say, okay, what did I do wrong? Maybe I didn't work as hard as I should have. Maybe I haven't maybe I've been kind of coasting. They're willing to do that introspection and hit internal, but they also balance that with external. So it's not always, oh, I'm a loser and I can't do it. There's also external saying, you know what, this was a much harder task than I've ever been faced with. Or being honest, let's all be honest. There are times where we fail because we don't get the resources we need. Now, we always want to be balanced in that, and that's what we're talking about here. I don't always want to blame other people, because sometimes I am the problem, and most of the time it's both, right? Most of the time, if I fail, there's probably some shared blame in there. But that's what we mean, by the good balance of internal and external. And so those are the elements. So that final slide there, hero. Positive PSYCAP. So hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism. And again, there's much research to be done, but they're seeing promising results in this area. And I said we were going to come back to it. Back up at the definition, psychological state of development. Excuse me. Those are those last 2 points. The important idea here is that these 4 areas are state-like, not trait-like. And Luthans makes a big deal about this. Talked about it a lot in our course. He talks about it in the book I have and another book I have. These areas are state-like, not trait-like. And what that means there is, in case you're not familiar, it means that they can all be developed. I can develop a state, or you could call it a competency. Technically, they're a little bit different. But a trait, we talk about personality traits. I can't develop a trait. You're born with it is the idea within this context. And so we want to emphasize that all of these, they have found hope, efficacy, resiliency, and optimism. Those are not just natural predispositions. Now, again, you probably know people, you'd say, well, I think this person's a little more hopeful, this person's a little more optimistic than others. Yes, but we can develop these attributes in everyone. And so that's where they've found probably the most promising results with positive PSYCAP, is that these things can be trained, they can be learned. And so then that opens up a world of opportunities for training and development within the work environment, and also within the academic environment as well, as we work with our students. So I hope this module has been interesting to you and has been helpful. Like I said, positive PSYCAP is one of those things that, I heard it just kind of clicked with me. It made a lot of sense. And I hope you're finding those things somewhere in your courses as well. And we will see you in the next module.